This is TV 10 and 55 Focus, a program dealing with issues affecting everyone on Long Island and the tri-state area. Now your host, Richard Rose.
Hi, I'm Richard Rose, and welcome to Focus. Today it is our pleasure to have as our guest Richard Amper, known as Dick Amper to folks around here, Executive Director of the Long Island Pine Barrens Society.
Good to be here.
Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Been a while since we talked with you, but the topics rarely change. It's back in the news again. This past week, I guess you could say, there's already been talk about a 6-month moratorium on what to do with the remaining money that was set aside by referendum by voters in Suffolk County in order to buy open space and to protect drinking water. Explain what that's all about.
Well, the people of Long Island have, and particularly the people in Suffolk County, have voted on more than a half a dozen occasions to take a quarter of a penny of the sales tax money and put it toward buying land that sits atop our purest drinking water supplies, especially at a time now where we're concerned about declining water quality. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But they've supported that. The money cannot be used for any other purpose. They're already paying 2.5 times the national average in taxes. But the government has been sort of whittling away at this, and it's not just slowing down the acquisition. There are people in the legislature and maybe in the administration that are saying maybe this is a time to end the program. And their argument, I mean, is not without some ring, not legitimacy, but ring. They're saying, well, we're in a period of tough tax time, and so maybe we shouldn't be spending the money. But since the money can only be spent for land acquisition, it's not part of the general fund. It was put up by the public for that purpose. It can't be done. And 80% of the public at the height of the recession said in a poll, we think this is a good time to buy the land because it's cheaper.
And we have some video of the kind of land that's set aside, fragile land, stuff that's near the Pine Barrens, things that are...
And all of this land that's important sits atop of our drinking water. We've got farmland that's important. Suffolk is still the #1 agricultural producing county in the state of New York. And we've got these beautiful spots that make people want to live on Long Island as well.
Well, all right, let's go through some historical facts. First of all, how much money was generated by this quarter-cent sales tax? Well, and how much was spent? And how much land was set aside?
Well, that's just a great question and a lot of answers. The answer is the people of Suffolk have put up more money than 45 of the 50 states, a whopping $1.5 billion
$1.5 billion
from this program, which was commenced in 1987 and continues to this day. It's the total amount of land preserved in Nassau and Suffolk counties is about 60,000 acres. It's only about 6% of the total land mass of Long Island, but it's been strategically purchased in the areas that sit atop our drinking water or protect woodlands and wetlands that we care about, or for farms.
Now, what percentage of the land that you set out to set aside with this kind of money has been already achieved?
We've got about 80% of what it is we think needs to be done. We think with only 60,000 acres of land up for grabs, still not committed to the environment for preservation and not committed to development, there's about 60,000 acres. If we could preserve just 20,000 of those acres, we'd probably be home free and complete the acquisition program, I hope, in a period of less than 10 years.
And the Pine Barrens has mostly been preserved. What percentage
That's
of that?
been a success story, Richard. We have now got 98% of the 100,000 acre Pine Barrens. There are only 1,800 acres that remain in private lands, and even those can't be developed because of the Pine Barrens Act. So that is a success story. We just like to finish it up in style.
And that's where the folks who want to use this remaining money, it's $15 million out of $1.5 billion. And I believe you stated before we started the show that they may have already taken $20 million to use towards the budget, and we'll explain that a little bit more.
Sure.
There'd be folks who've been for the environment who say, look, we're in a tough economic time right now. We spent almost all of that $1.5 billion to achieve, in your estimate, 80% of the goal, and nearly all of the Pine Barrens. Right now, we have no choice. We need what is just really a couple of tens of millions of dollars to deal with the economic difficulties we have here in Suffolk County.
Well, in fact, the Suffolk County and Nassau County budgets are $100 million in deficit this year alone and are expected to get greater. The public is putting up its money, paying its taxes, even in the midst of this recession, and they are doing everything that they can do and then some. It would not be fair then to take money that they volunteered in addition. This is not from the general fund. This is not money that's supposed to be spent on government services. They said, we're paying high taxes, but we're willing to give you a quarter penny more every time we make a purchase, a quarter percent sales tax, if you will use it to protect our drinking water. That's important. If you don't want to do that, you can't have it for anything else. And the legislature is saying, maybe we can.
Well, it seems pretty ironclad, but now you're saying that $20 million was spent improperly already. What was it justified because it was related uses or something?
Listen, everybody on Long Island, even the 80% of the people who say that they're environmentalists, are concerned about the economy. Nobody likes a recession. But government is using the recession as an excuse to raid money that was set aside. Again, if it's done by referendum, if the public voted that, that's money that's extra for something. The politicians don't come to us and say, we'd like to raise your taxes, but now they want to take the money and use it to pay for government services and plug holes in the bloated budget. And we think that's not cricket. If they want to do that, they should go back to the voters and say, do you want to increase your taxes?
Well, what if they did? What if they did this thing where they're talking about a 6-month extension or delay before they decide what to do with the money? And some legislators have pointed out that some farmers and landowners have already been in negotiations for contracts and deals that would already add up to $7-8 million. And discussions with you before the show, you said, well, that would all come to an end, and then there'd be no land set aside. But maybe perhaps after 6 months, the idea is to then put it up to referendum again and ask voters if this money could be taken for that purpose. Would you oppose that if they went back to voters and said, could we take this money now and use it for other purposes?
Well, no. I just think it's a little bit illusory. I think it's sort of whistling past the graveyard. The money has already been set aside to pay the people that are in contract. They've made a deal with the county, and now the county is considering reneging on the deal. How likely is a landowner to be to make a deal with the county anytime in the next 10 years, long after the recession's over, if the county can say, you sign and promise to sell us the land, and then we'll decide we're not going to buy it? We think they should honor the commitments that they have. If they want to go back to the voters and go to referendum, they can do that. But you cover the news. How likely is it that a voter is going to say, I'm in favor of a proposition, a referendum that says, I want to take the money that I wanted to use for protecting drinking water and preserving open space and increase my taxes? I don't think anybody's voting for that.
Which is why it hasn't been publicly proposed
exactly
yet.
Correct.
Okay, but now you had said before we began taping this broadcast that $20 million has already been spent out of this fund improperly. How so?
The legislature just passed a simple resolution. We told them they weren't allowed to do it. The law, the referendum that the people voted for by anywhere from 62 to 84% margins over the years, said specifically, if you want to change the formula, if you want to use this in any other way, you have to come back to the voters. They didn't do that. We've gone to court.
What was it spent on?
Say it again?
What was the $20 million spent on?
Just to plug holes in the budget. They won't cut expenses. The problem in Washington, in Albany, and in Hauppauge is that they keep increasing the cost of government services. They won't cut that, and then they're surprised when they can't make ends meet.
Okay, so now you talked about how it's some lawmakers want to let it expire. Is it set to expire, and what are you attempting to do to extend it, this quarter-cent tax?
The program in 2007 was extended to say you could borrow money against anticipated sales tax revenues to buy land now while it was less expensive and still available. As of the end of last November, that program switched as part of the referendum to pay as you go. You can only spend between now and 2030 what you take in any given year. Instead of just stopping and saying, okay, how do we reprioritize what we're going to buy with less income coming in, less money available, they are now talking about stopping the program altogether, and that's what scares us, and the legislature is going to take this up as early as this coming Tuesday.
So if they stop the program, would that be the first step towards then trying to get some more money for the other budget problems? Because the voters are already putting that money in? Is that what you're suspecting?
In my opinion, I think if they stopped the program altogether, they'd try to rate it again to plug holes in the budget.
All right, well, we have to move on, but you can see already this is going to come up next week, right?
That's
in
correct.
The legislature.
You're right on top of the news, as you always are.
And we'll find out just where that's going. But when we come back, we're going to get the latest update from Dick Amper about the quality of our water. Should we be worried? Stay with us.
TV 10 and 55 Focus now continues.
Hey, welcome back. I'm Richard Rose. We're here with our guest, Dick Amper. He is the executive director for the Long Island Pine Barrens Society, which is celebrating how many years now?
35.
35 years, and one of the most respected organizations, environmental organizations, not only in these parts, but even around the country. You're contacted by people all around the nation, are you not? I bet even from around the world.
That is, people look at the success that we've had here on Long Island, I think owing principally to Long Islanders' commitment to drinking water protection and habitat preservation. They've done a good job, and people want to know how they can do it where they live too.
Is the drinking water like #1 priority for your organization?
I think it's the #1 priority for every Long Islander. Every poll we
Why is
do
that?
says, well, because it defines whether or not we have a functional society. We cannot, for example, have a healthy economy without a healthy environment. If we can't drink the water, and that is not to say that everybody should stop drinking the water today, but we have seen a precipitous decline since the last study 17 years ago, to the point where 40% more nitrogen, the contaminants from human waste, sewage, fertilizers, those sorts of things.
Lawn greening
all
your
of that,
lawn, farmers.
That's correct, farm as well.
Yeah.
But all of that is up 40% in the most close to the surface aquifer, the upper glacial, and an astounding and concerning 200% in the Magathy, which is a purer supply beneath it.
That's the aquifer
That
below
is
the bedrock.
And everybody, I
That's what
think,
we
on
do
Long
where we get
Island
our
now
water.
understands. And not everybody does. We don't get our water from upstate reservoirs like the city. It's beneath our feet and out of sight, out of mind in some case. But what we do on the surface finds its way into our water, and that is of increasing concerns, not just human wastewater, but fertilizers and pesticides and home products, even pharmaceuticals. We are now
Painkillers,
finding
prescription drugs, you mean?
everything over the counter or prescription. Grandmother taught us that we were supposed to dump those in the toilet, and Richard, you would not believe the number of hospitals and nursing homes that are using this regimen to dispose of drugs, and they're showing up in our water supply.
Well, this is what people don't get, though, is how you would think if it's being disposed wastewater, you know, that goes down the toilet, as you say, and you either have a septic tank or a collection system town-wide that would prevent that from getting into the groundwater. How is that happening?
Septic system is about a 20,000-year-old system where you put the waste in the ground and then you drink water from a well next to it. But even our sewage
Sounds
treatment,
awful.
it is awful. And by the way, 70% of Suffolk County is dependent upon cesspools. Doesn't
don't have
the sewers like
systems,
Western
right?
Suffolk and Nassau does. But apart from that, even the sewage treatment plants have never been designed to take out pharmaceuticals. That was not an anticipated thing, and they have problems with some of the volatile organic compounds, the kinds of things that come out of pesticides and household cleansers and those sorts of things. So we're putting, you know, the old expression about computers, garbage in, garbage out. It's happening to our water supply.
Now, you know, skeptics would say, okay, Dick Amper, this is parts per billion or parts per million, and maybe it went from 2 parts per million to 2.8 parts per million, and that'd be a 40% increase. And so we really shouldn't be worried because it went up 1/8 of a point difference.
Well,
Are we talking about, is that a valid
No, that it is a
point?
legitimate point, because some of those who would have us not be concerned say that the increase in nitrogen is only 1 part per liter. That's
per liter?
Right. That's a 200% increase over the last time. So
And for the rest
how
of
you
us who forgot our
describe it
metrics,
depends
a
on how.
liter, a liter is for those who forgot the metric system here.
Well, it's a little less than a quart.
A little less than a quart. So it's gone up 1 part per quart, though?
Correct.
That
And
does
by
sound
the way, and we're
significant.
also for the first time finding out in what quantities, in what percentage, in what concentrations are these chemicals tolerable in water, and when do they become very, very serious carcinogens. And we're finding out that it's more soon than later.
And we're also finding out that we need to upgrade our wastewater treatment plants.
That is
And
job
there's
one.
absolutely no money for that, right?
Absolutely. And we can't afford to do it. It is estimated to cost $300 billion to sewer the rest of Suffolk County. The government can't even pay its current bills at this point. They don't have $300 billion. And what's worse, Richard, is that we're finding out that the septic systems we're using are not wholly effective in meeting not just drinking water standards, but in fact the surface waters that are turning brown. We've got red tide that is seriously compromising shellfish that we then consume.
Well, what are we supposed to do? Because that's a number that, you know, we're not going to get $300 billion anytime soon. You're not going to get sewers. There's not enough money to go replace these treatment plants or create new ones. It usually was the federal government. The state doesn't have the money.
You got it.
So then what is the citizen supposed to do to help at least delay the problem here?
If we cannot take it out through sewers, then we have to stop putting it in. And that means that we have to do less development, and we have to do more responsible farming, and we have to be, as homemakers, more aware of what we're doing with it. We're talking about cosmetics, personal care products like fragrances, sunblock, the kinds of things that we use, the solvents we use for cleaning, the fertilizers and the pesticides we put on our plants so the flowers are twice as big.
Well, how would you dispose of that then?
Well, the answer is we need to use more benign chemicals. We've already come out just since this report and said some of these chemicals need to be banned. Not everywhere, not even everywhere in New York State, but where you have the first federally designated sole source aquifer, where all of your water comes from beneath your feet, you have to behave with these chemicals a little more carefully than people that aren't drinking the water from underneath the ground.
And then you got the folks who don't have a job saying, you know what, I need a job first before I can worry about all these things on the environment. We need some development that you're saying is a cause of this increased pollution. And, you know, if I can't feed my family or have put a roof over my head, I can't even think about the concerns you have right now.
Well, there are two problems. The first of them is that the money that we're spending to preserve land and protect water would not otherwise be used for these other purposes. And the second thing, and I think this is really, really significant, is that the very development that people are advocating for new jobs in the economy is actually what is increasing the cost of roads and police protection and schools and so that are making the taxes intolerable and undermining the economy. And by the way, at the end of the day, we live on an island, and any economy that's based on developing land is not sustainable, and we're running out of space and time.
Well, maybe we could do like Japan, where they filled in the ocean. Outside of Tokyo Harbor, they did filling in part of the harbor. I was just kidding when I said that.
I imagine that you were.
Okay, when we return, we're going to talk about what has become one of the biggest issues in the environmental community, hydrofracking. Can it be safely done? When we return with our guest, stay with us.
TV 10 and 55 Focus continues.
Yeah, welcome back. Richard Rose here with our guest, Dick Amper, Executive Director of the Long Island Pine Barrens Society. I mentioned hydrofracking. We'll get to that in a moment, but the Carmen's River, there's something very important going on there as well. I'd like to talk about that for a moment. Fill us in.
Well, the Carmen's River is one of the most pristine rivers on Long Island. It flows from Middle Island to Great South Bay. It's a great natural treasure. We have a plan that would actually preserve the land in that watershed corridor, transfer the development out of there into downtown areas, not in residential communities, where we would build affordable housing that young people could use in downtown areas close to stores and shopping and entertainment and transport. It's a real good plan. We haven't been able to complete that. It was expected to be done in about 3 to 6 months. Now we're a year and a quarter into the process, and March 1st has been the deadline established to find out exactly how much land will be acquired, how much development will be transferred, whether any of this land can be rezoned. Can we make it happen? The decision makers will be the town of Brookhaven, the county of Suffolk, and the state of New York. If we can all come together, we have less than a month. Everybody keeps reminding me it's the 1st of March, and there are now 29 days this February, but we are really down to the last 4 weeks to try to make the Carmen's River plan before that deal goes south.
Because the idea was that they would trade doing development by the river for other key zones that would be acceptable to everyone, but then their debate has broken down over, well, where are these key zones, and sometimes they have not been desirable to the developers.
That's exactly right, and so now they're looking at all of those potential sites, because we do need to build the kinds of apartments and housing that would keep our young people here. Nobody disagrees about that. It's where they would go. Are there enough of them to offset the value of the land that we're trying to protect? We've been grappling this with this for more than a year, and we got about a month to finish the job.
Okay, let's talk about hydrofracking.
Sure.
This is a term that is just now coming into the public consciousness little by little. Someone said that we're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas, and that it can be reached through this process of hydrofracking because it's just below the surface but very close to the groundwater table. Tell us what the issue is there from your concern.
Sure.
And how it's done,
Sure.
hydrofracking.
It's a lot of natural gas, and it's not as though it were just below the surface where the kids digging in the backyard are going to find it. It can be 8,000 to 10,000 feet below the surface. And to get it out, The process is that you use high-powered, high-velocity water in combination with toxic chemicals. There's no disagreement about that. And that is what fractures hydrological.
They actually fracture the bedrock to force it up to the surface.
It's usually shale. It's that kind of rock, and it exists in the Northeast, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, New York State. And the question here is, I mean, part of the stuff that's in New York State is just north of the reservoir that takes care of New York. How safe are those chemicals? How do we manage them? How do we keep them from entering the groundwater system?
That can happen?
What do those chemicals do? Yes,
it has happened, right?
It's happened in more than 1,000 occasions where we actually have them showing up in people's water supply. Everybody's familiar with the actual video of people igniting the fire coming out of their faucet. That's how volatile it is. And I think the governor of New York, Governor Cuomo, has taken a cautious position saying, let's find out. It is a useful resource, although it will keep us dependent on fossil fuels, maybe local fossil fuels and not foreign fossil fuels, but it's not getting us closer to energy independence. It's not getting us closer to solar and wind power. But the fact of the matter is, the governor and the Department of Environmental Conservation are trying to say, is it safe? Can it be done properly? The president, on the other hand, is saying, yes, it has to be done safely, but he's sort of encouraging it in ways that I think is premature. We just want to find out if it's safe before you do it. I don't think anybody should disagree with that.
Are you already opposed to it?
No. And
I don't opposed to it?
No, I don't know very many environmental groups that are. They think we should know first and do it only if and where it's safe, and I think that's just commonsensical. And just to say, we need it, let's go get it, we don't care about the consequences to something as basic as drinking water, probably a bad idea.
Now, typically, you say it can be thousands of feet down, but I've also read that it can be much closer to the surface, within a couple hundred feet, and sometimes as low as 50 feet. And also, but isn't that also true of the groundwater table? Sometimes the groundwater table can be only a few feet below the surface.
We described earlier in this program the upper glacial versus the Magathie versus the Lloyd. We have several different layers here. They are not, in fact, proposing hydrofracking here on Long Island, but they are suggesting that some of these chemicals might end up in treatment plants here on Long Island.
So it could be done somewhere else and we would get the residue of it?
That's correct.
Are we set up to do that?
There are several facilities that are being listed as suitable for that. Again, it would be useful to know the magnitude of the threat before we decided that we wanted to be in the business of dealing with this kind of waste.
And is that a decision you can make, or is it mandatory that they accept this kind of waste?
Well, none of it's required. I mean, none of it's mandatory in New York State because fracking itself has not been given the environmental blessing of state government. And all they're doing, and I think it's going to get resolved this year, is deciding what's safe, what would you have to do, and how much can you do.
We have just over a minute. How important is the environment in this year's presidential election?
I think it is way less important to the average voter than the economy. The economy is everything. It's most of what the candidates talk about. There is some difference between Democratic candidates and policymakers and Republican policymakers on environmental issues, but among voters, you will find that Democrats and Republicans are equally supportive of the environment for the most part. So I think it's not going to be an issue because the public doesn't disagree about protecting the environment, but I think everybody agrees that job one is the economy, and that's what we can expect the candidates to talk about.
But you'll still be on the lookout for any shortcuts that endanger the environment, right? Just
Absolutely.
To stimulate jobs.
And by the way, we'll also be on the lookout for green jobs that will help advance the environment and the economy.
All right, there you go. Well, we want to thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Richard Amper, Dick Amper, the Executive Director of the Long Island Pine Barrens Society, celebrating 35 years now.
True.
36 will be in October, I think, right?
Right.
Okay, so thank you for being with us, and thank you for being there. I'm Richard Rose. Be sure to join us next week for yet another edition of Focus.